Welcome to episode 81 of the Cashflow Connections podcast. The topic for today is how to make your business run like clockwork with Mike Michalowicz. I know a lot of you listeners are entrepreneurs, and even for those of you that aren't full-time entrepreneurs, you have an entrepreneur mindset or a fairly significant side hustle, especially if you're listening to the show right now. Well, today we're going to discuss why so many people are living in what our guest calls entrepreneurial poverty. There are so many people out there that have essentially exchanged working 40 hours a week at a reliable job to working 70 hours a week and having all the pressure of owning your own business can be pretty extreme for a lot of you just put on your head, put in your life. In fact, I was at a conference recently, actually about this exact same thing with a different speaker, and the speaker asked the crowd this question: when can entrepreneurs work? And the crowd answered, all the time. And then he asked, and when are entrepreneurs done working? And the crowd answered, never. And he said, exactly. And that is the exact recipe for disaster. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to discuss some of the key highlights of this really impactful book called Clockwork, which is really about how to create systems which will allow you to make your business run more smoothly. And if you want to, even run completely without you doing anything. We're going to talk about how to analyze your business's current mix of doing, deciding, delegating, and designing, and what the optimal mix is for a really performing clockwork-light business. And this is the good part. We're going to talk about how you can create a team of all-stars, which will eventually allow you to take your first 4-week vacation without worrying about the business, without thinking that you have to check emails or your business is going to completely collapse, without doing all that stuff, without having the guilt associated with that. That's what we're going to talk about today. Like I mentioned, this is an all-time book. I'm a huge proponent of it. Make sure to check it out if you're interested in the topic, which a lot of you should be. You will not be disappointed. So as you guys know, this show is really a niche podcast. Yes, it is the case that the commercial real estate sector is large. Yes, it is the case that there's a lot of podcast listeners out there. But when it comes to this particular show, the interviews are a little bit longer. The content is a little bit more dense. And because of all that, it isn't as accessible to the masses, especially the beginners. But I know that the people that do listen to the show get a ton out of it just because of the conversations I've had with some of the listeners. I can tell you guys know so much about commercial real estate, certainly more than I knew, especially, let's say, my first 12 months or so. There's just so much great content out there. So if you have gotten a lot out of the show, you think it's made a pretty significant impact on your life, your perspective on investing, whether or not to go forward or pass on a certain deal, do me a massive favor and send a quick 10 to 15 second video of yourself leaving a quick review of the show, just a high level of why you like the show. That would be awesome. This is something you can do just on your iPhone. Don't worry about the quality of the video. You don't need to rent out studio time and a camera crew to do this. If you're just driving or if you're just at your desk, turn on your iPhone and record yourself doing a 10 to 15 second video. That would be awesome. We're going to compile some of these and post it on our social media to generate some buzz. Now remember, 10 to 15 seconds is not that long. And I know some of you are quite verbose communication wizards. So just keep it short so we can use it for this project. And I'm hoping it turns into something kind of cool. So just record it on your iPhone, then email it to info@cashflowconnections.com. And I would be greatly appreciative. All right. Hope you enjoyed the episode. How's it going, everyone? Our guest for today is Mike Michalowicz, who is the author of Profit First, Surge, The Pumpkin Plan, and his newest release, Clockwork. By his 35th birthday, Mike had founded and sold 2 companies, one to private equity and another to a Fortune 500 firm. Today, he is running his third multi-million-dollar venture, which is Profit First Professionals. He's also a former small business columnist for the Wall Street Journal and a former business makeover specialist for MSNBC. Over the years, Mike has traveled the globe speaking with thousands of entrepreneurs, and he's here today to share some of the best things that he's learned over that time. We are especially going to talk about Clockwork because it is an absolute stop what you're doing after this podcast, of course, and read this type of book. So Mike, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Hunter, it's awesome to be here. Thanks for that wonderful intro.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm really fascinated by this book, and I'm really interested to get into a lot of detail in terms of this, because this is major paradigm shift in terms of my own business. But before we even go into that, let's talk about a little about yourself. What were you doing prior to beginning writing some of these really powerful books about entrepreneurship? Let's talk about some of those early wins you mentioned, or I mentioned in that bio, prior to your 35th birthday,
Sure.
For example.
Sure. And I think actually the most interesting thing is not a win. It's a major reset in my life, a major loss. But the kind of resume bullets, I started my first business right out of school, quite frankly, because I couldn't get a job that I desired. So I never planned on being an entrepreneur. I thrust myself into it. I'm grateful I did. I fell in love with it. And my first business was in computer networks, grew it, ultimately sold it after 8 years of running it to private equity, which sounds miraculous, or not miraculous, it sounds nice. The kind of the thread behind it, though, is I was struggling to be profitable throughout. And that became a common thread for me. My second business was in computer crime investigation. Right place, right time. Enron trial broke. Our company was hired to do a major part of the investigation for Enron. And ultimately, that company, I sold it to a Fortune 500. But it was never profitable throughout. And that became a common thread for me. I started my third business, which you didn't mention in the bio, which was an angel investing company. And it was something I was horrible at. I had no right to be in that space, quite frankly. I had no experience. I started investing in businesses with my own money. I blew it. It was a combination of arrogance and ignorance. I financially destroyed myself. So by my mid-30s, I wiped myself out so badly that my accountant told me I should declare bankruptcy. Something that I never did because I didn't feel that my creditors were responsible for my arrogance and erroneous ways with money. But I did have to come home to my family to announce, I'll never forget the day, it was February 14th, 2008, come home to my family to say that we lose our house, which we did lose it, our possessions. We had to cut costs radically because I couldn't sustain. And as I was saying this became a turning moment for me. I was sobbing in front of my wife and 3 children, embarrassed by what I'd done. My daughter ran to her bedroom to grab her piggy bank and brought it over to me and said, "Daddy, I'll support our family. Don't worry." And that was a knife right to my soul for having to make my daughter feel compelled, my family feel compelled to become the supporters. Like I thought that was my role and function as a business owner. But I'm grateful for that because that planted the seed. It wasn't like the next morning I woke up and said, "I've got this all figured out." I went through a struggle with depression for a period of time and so forth. But what it did plant a seed to open my eyes to what I didn't know about entrepreneurship, which is almost everything. That I had to learn about finance. I had to learn about time and managing it and focus and sales and all these things. I decided to start writing about it, quite frankly, to solve my own problems, but also something that if I found the answers, I wanted to share with other entrepreneurs. And I am now on a life journey. I still run a business, but really my primary vocation is I'm a full-time author. I write all the time, as writing today again, writing books that solve challenges that I face, but I think so many other entrepreneurs face, and making the solution simple and digestible. That's the big thing. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, certainly. And I can tell from, experience, but also kind of reading the stuff that you've written, when you have to go through the detail of writing something, you have to be an absolute expert in it. You can't use charisma to overcome your lack of knowledge, for example. You have to literally know exactly what you're talking about because it's written in ink. And so when it comes to authors that focus exclusively on entrepreneurship, their level of expertise in some of these details is so well thought through because it has to be, and as opposed to people that just have it intuitively, for example. That's really interesting. So would you say that go ahead.
Well, and I was thinking, just wanted to add to that the fact that I run a business too is really a blessing because these books force me to not just research and prepare for it, but to stay steadfast with it. Like when I wrote Profit First, if I don't run Profit First in my businesses, it would be laughable. I mean, I'm the guy who wrote the book. I better live by that standard. So it's a great enforcement mechanism. I do. Clockwork, I wrote about this concept called a 4-week vacation. Well, I took it. And I'm doing it again. It's now an annual thing. And actually, we're rolling it out through the entirety of our company with our employees now. So it holds me to a standard. There's a saying that the best student in every room is the teacher. I think by being an author, by teaching stuff, you really got to nail down these things for yourself.
For sure. And actually, I do want to talk about the 4-week vacation for sure. But before we even jump into that, when was kind of the moment where you felt that you could make writing a part of your career or a significant portion of your income? Like, when were those moments, those wins where you were like, not only do I enjoy this, but I actually do have a knack for this?
Yeah. So, I'll tell you the moment where I knew I could make a living that way, because I remember vividly when I declared I was going to be an author. It's because I felt called to do this. I wanted to do this. It's calls at my heartstrings. And person after person would come to me and say, authors make no money. Like you're screwed. You'll never make it. And, first of all, that to me becomes inspirational to defeat the naysayers. But who changed everything was I ran into Tim Ferriss right when he was becoming popular with 4-Hour Workweek. We happened to be on the same TV show. We got interviewed. There was this popular TV show called The Big Idea. This is from almost 10 years ago. And we're both on the set. We're both in the green room. And there it is, me facing Tim Ferriss. And I said, Tim, I'm a new author. I admire what you've done. I got to ask you a question. Can you make money selling books? And he starts laughing. He's like, you can make a shitload of money selling books. He's like, yeah. He goes, there's massive profit centers. And what I realized is when it comes to asking questions about the ability to do something or not, ask people who've gone through the process. If other authors were coming to me, like Tim Ferriss, and Tim Ferriss said, no, you don't make money doing this. You got to get a speaking career or something. Then I would put serious value in it. But when a guy who'd achieved what I want to achieve said, oh yeah, it's a no-brainer. You can make tons of money this way. That opened my eyes. Okay, I got to follow his path and believe in him and disregard the naysayers. And that's when I started, my behavior changed around how I was doing it. I realized that the book was a product, just like any other business, and I'd be treated that way. That I had to market it well and effectively, that the product itself had to be remarkable, that people would digest it, love it, and want to remark about it to other people to start that, viral kind of word of mouth spread. And with that change of perception, I really devoted everything I can to making remarkable books. And it's of course for the readers to judge if it's remarkable or not. But when I'm done with the book, I have to be so satisfied that a reader can live on this book alone without a single consulting call with someone else, no coach, just read the book and implement it. And I feel if the book gets there, then it has the potential to spread by word of mouth. So yeah, that was the turning moment for me.
For sure. And I can actually, it's a good point to note that if you are in the same room as Tim Ferriss and you are able to ask him directly that question, you're also, those green lights are kind of showing up as well. And so it's just generally in your career, if you find yourself with that momentum, you're surrounded by the people that are doing well and that you look up to, you're like, you can see where you're going to be in the future by just basically looking at who you're surrounding yourself by. So that's also a good turning point. Just the fact that you're in that room is, a green light, in my opinion. So let's talk about Clockwork. To me, it's a major paradigm shift. I think there's a lot of material in here that people need to be taking seriously. But what did you really set out to accomplish when you started to write this book? So
what I've discovered is that there's different forms of what I call entrepreneurial poverty. Now, the traditional mindset is around finances, and how it works is the day you start a business, I don't care what field, what category you're in, the day you start your first business, the people around you, your friends and so forth who don't have a business have a misperception. They think the day you start that you're a millionaire and that you don't work. You sit on the beach drinking margaritas. And the reality, of course, is the reverse. Most entrepreneurs work their tails off 24/7 all the time. If they're not working, they're thinking about work. And we're not making money. And that gap between what the world sees us and what the reality is what I call entrepreneurial poverty. The insidious problem, too, though, is we feel we have to carry it on as entrepreneurs and business owners and say, yeah, business is great, and kind of pound our chest while we're dying inside. So I've lived this for too long. I know too many entrepreneurs that have lived this. So I've set my mission to eradicate entrepreneurial poverty. Well, Clockwork addresses not the financial poverty, but the time component, which I think is actually even more insidious. When entrepreneurs figure out their money, and many don't, sadly, once they do, they also realize that often they're carrying the business on their back. So maybe they're starting to make money, but if they're away for a day, the business is in real trouble. They go on vacation, they got to bring the equipment, the laptop, and so forth with them and be in constant communication, therefore not doing a vacation. So I wrote Clockwork specifically to fix that, to recover time. And the subtitle of the book is Design Your Business to Run Itself. That's the goal. When the business can run independently of us, now we are truly business owners as opposed to business operators. So this is a way to become a business owner and have the business run on automatic, which then avails you all the time in the world to do what you want, when you want, in life, but also back within your business. I mean, you own the business after all. If it gives you joy, you can insert yourself now in the way that you want to. But additionally, increases the valuation of the business. Now, I've been blessed to be through 2 exits now, and I know very clearly what buyers put value in. What they put value in is in turnkey businesses. So if they can acquire a business that's not dependent on the owner, that means if the owner flakes out or leaves the next day or gets sick or something, that the business will continue to hum along. They're not at risk. Many businesses that people try to sell it's so dependent upon the owner that the acquirer is taking on significant risk. If the previous owner is sick or unavailable, the entire business is hindered. So Clockwork gets out of the business to increase its value and for us to live life on our terms.
Yeah, I like that. And I think it kind of speaks to positioning yourself as an exiting company, a company that may experience a potential exit is important, because even if that exit doesn't happen, or even if that's not your particular goal, usually the business is actually going to run more smoothly. And you can also take some time off when appropriate. Or if something happens, like you get sick, for example, your income stream is not completely deteriorated. I think it's the later stage in a lot of entrepreneurs' transitions, because when you start working, it's all about hustle. And so a lot of people out there, there's a lot of books about, you just got to get out there and hustle, got to get in the hustle. Yeah, well, at a certain point, that's a given.
Yeah.
Like, we're taking it for granted that you're hustling. If you're not, like, that's step 0 to 1.
Yeah.
But in order to get to step 3 or 4 or 5, you have to start building a business. But before you can even do that, though, you have to actually know what you're doing in your own business. And I think that the first real system that you put in place is having people analyze their time. So I want to hear why it's so important to really do a actual analysis of your time, and some of the key takeaways in terms of why people are so surprised how they actually are spending their time as opposed to how they think they're spending their time.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of people heard of this concept of analyzing your time. What Clockwork I did was I also bring about this concept of categorizing the type of time after you analyze it, because this will bring tremendous clarity. So first, why do we analyze time? The first thing is, many of us at a, qualitative level, assumption-based level, we think we spend time doing certain things when we're not, or we're doing more than we expect. Someone may say, I spend about an hour a day on Facebook, not even half hour. But when you actually start tracking it, you realize, damn, I'm spending like 4 hours on there. An email, which I thought takes 10 minutes, that's taking like another 3 hours. So we start getting a real judgment of where we're spending time. And since the use of time is all equal, an hour mowing the lawn is the same as an hour preparing a proposal, that's all the same use of time. The value, or the potential return, is much higher on certain activities, like writing that proposal, probably a lot more valuable to you long term than it is to mow the lawn. So therefore, we may want to hire someone to mow the lawn, or whatever the activity is. But once we track our time, and I think this, tracking a normal week or two for yourself, we then need to categorize it. And this was the big aha that came out of Clockwork. There are 4 categories, I call them the 4 Ds, that every business experiences and must be doing, but the entrepreneur needs to navigate themselves through these 4 Ds to the highest level. The 4 Ds are this. The base level is doing, and doing means it's an activity that derives benefit to your customers, or it's an activity that supports the deliverable of a benefit to the customer. The deliverable could be, if you're a lawyer doing legal services, but something that benefits that deliverable could be invoicing, marketing. Any of those activities are all considered doing. And most entrepreneurs in the early stages are the doers. They do everything. But we very quickly need to climb the ladder. The next level up is called deciding. Many businesses naturally transition to this, but get stuck here. Deciding is where you bring on colleagues, help, other resources to start assigning work to. Now, we don't call this phase deciding. We often call it delegating. We wrongly label it. Deciding is where we task rabbit things to other people. I had a gal that came on board here, amazing person. I assigned her the responsibility to do invoices. I said, please bill our clients, and here's how we do it. And a second later, her name was Jackie. She'd come back and ask a question, and I'd give her a decision. We sort by last or first name, and I'd tell her, let's do it by last name. She'd come back a minute later. We'd bill in increments of 15 minutes or a half hour. I'd make a decision. The challenge here is, while people are doing the work or the tasks you assign them, you are the sole decision maker, and you achieve decision fatigue. You get overwhelmed with decisions. You sit there and you don't get any of your own work done. And at a certain point, it actually becomes very frustrating. It's like, are these people around me idiots? They can't figure it out themselves? So it gets very frustrating. But if you think about it, is by design, we actually enforce this mechanism. First of all, an employee would rather get the decision from the boss, because then they can do no wrong. If they follow instructions, if the outcome is bad, they simply say, well, you told me to do it. But also from the entrepreneur's angle, it satisfies our ego. To know all beings of our business means that we're important to our business. We are a superhero. We can fix anything. So it serves our ego, and that's why we often stay stuck here. What we need to do is aspire to the next D, which is called delegation, or delegating. And what this process is not the assignment of tasks, the assignment of outcomes. An outcome is what we want to achieve from doing a task or whatever, but giving the freedom of the person assigned this outcome, the decision making around how to get there. So for that example, with Jackie was invoicing, instead of saying, here's how we do invoicing, copy this, I say to Jackie, it's important that we bill our clients accurately and timely because that's how we keep this business afloat and that's how we treat our clientele fairly. Does that make sense? So we have to get to agreement on the outcome. Once we do, we say, well, we have a best practice. Here's how we have been invoicing, but any ideas you have or decisions you want to make or challenges you face, I've hired you for that thing on your shoulders called a head. You make a decision around it and go do it. That's what delegation is. And, the funny thing is, I think we know we need to do this. And when they come back with questions, because that's the natural tendency, we have to force the decision back on them and say, listen, I'm not going to give you my answer. I hired you for your answer. What have you decided to do? So keep pushing it back on them. But there's one more element that no one's heard of and no one does, or very few people do, and therefore unwinds this process. And what it is the reward or acknowledgement and support of all decisions, including bad decisions. True story, Jackie came back into the office one day and said, Mike, we're sorting invoices right now, and it's very hard to find because people have the same first name or last name. I've come up with a new system. I've decided we're going to sort by middle initial. And I had to bite my tongue here, but I'm like, oh, that's something I never thought of. Let's go do it. Tell me how it works out. And it was a disaster. But 2 weeks later, when she came back and said it's not working out, I said, Jackie, the fact you decided to sort it in a new way was innovative. And while it didn't work out, find a new way, because the old way wasn't working either. And she went back and she finally came up with this coding system that worked out very well. And I'll tell you, in most cases, I would have been like, Jackie, you're an idiot. Don't sort by last name. This is crazy. I'm going to do the work myself. And I'd revert back from delegating back to the deciding phase and unwind my company. The last thing I want to share is once you get to true delegation, where you've empowered your employees to lead and make decisions, where it's okay to make mistakes and you are a coach and mentor for them continuing to navigate through that and grow the organization, that's when you've moved to the highest level, which is called designing. And designing is where you have clarity on the outcome you want for your business, the vision. And then you are choreographing your team, the resources you have. You're organizing everything to move there as efficiently as possible while navigating around your challenges. Entrepreneurs need to become designers and leave the doing to the rest of your business.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so much awesome stuff in there. So just to summarize really quickly, there's basically 4 of those Ds. And in order of kind of the low minions of the company to the CEO would be doing, then deciding, then delegating, then designing. And right. As you work your way up on the ladder, your time becomes much more valuable because you can hire people to do things for you. You can even hire people to decide for you. It's very challenging to hire someone to design your own business. And that's what being the entrepreneur is. That's what being the CEO role is. Now, it's pretty funny because everyone wants to think that they are superhuman geniuses. And it feels good when they say, look, I don't know how to figure this out. And you're like, well, I figured it out. So of course you can't, but I'll just answer your question. That way I'm always needed in the business. Well, that is like, again, that's like the stages of entrepreneurship through the growth period. I have found that a lot of people that are hyper successful, they do not want to be the smartest person in the room. They want to be known as the person that always is reaching up in different directions and also knows that people using their own unique ability is how they're best suited in the business. So that the less they're needed to do other things, it's not needed. So again, I think that's really powerful. Let's talk about like the optimal mix here, because I think that as an entrepreneur, we think, okay, we can do all this stuff, but what is a good mix of those 4 Ds that you talk about there in terms of the overall time of the business?
So as I was analyzing it, I identified, and I wasn't surprised, but the Pareto Principle or the 80-20 rule played out here too. And what I found, optimal businesses spend about 80% of the time doing and 20% of their time in the remaining work, deciding, designing, delegating. Deciding being the smallest amount. That's where we're making decisions for others. And often in the early stages of a business, the best training is through making decisions. So people start learning through practical experience, and then you start assigning more tasks or more decision responsibility to them. A small portion in delegation, but the majority of that 20% of time is spent in designing. So it's interesting, when you start a business and you're a solopreneur, you got to be doing like 80% of your time. If you work a 40-hour week, well, that's 32, 36 hours, whatever, of doing the work for your clients. But the remaining time is now focusing on the vision, making strategic decisions, really contemplating the strategy to get to the next level. As your business grows, you hire that first full-time employee. Maybe they spend 100% of the time doing, but now you only have to spend, say, 30% or 40% of your time doing as you work more on design work. I would argue even massive corporations like Jeff Bezos, Amazon, Jeff Bezos still does some of the doing. I am sure he still does some sales. When I order toothpaste on Amazon, he's not packaging the shipment. But when Amazon is negotiating a strategic deal, I bet you Bezos is at the table. When they release the new Alexa model, he's probably one of the people testing out at his own home. So he's involved in some of the doing work, but the vast majority is strategic. I think the lesson here is that moving from working in your business as a doer to designing the outcomes for your business, that transition is a throttle. Michael Gerber is famed for his book, E-Myth. It's a must read. And in his book, he puts, don't work in the business, work on the business, which I agree with wholeheartedly. I think the misinterpretation that I had when I read that book originally, though, was as a switch. If I worked hard enough, one day I'd work on the business. If I just carried it on my back long enough, it could be a superhero for my business enough that one day it would just kind of jump over to this new setting where I am now master of this organization. And now what I believe, and actually I met with Michael and discussed this, is that it's a transition, it's a throttle, that we slowly move over from working in the business to on the business, piecemeal, if you will, at times. But if we can do this process for many businesses, it's about a year to two of this transition. But in those cases, in the research and implementation we had of this, most businesses, the owner can get out of working in the business and be fully designing the business within a year and a half to two.
Pretty remarkable. As you're going through this, I'm already thinking of all the people that are going to say, they can't do this are the exact people that should be focusing on this. And they say, listen, I cannot spend any time designing my business right now. You should see my 100+ emails that I have to respond by tomorrow, or the business is going to completely collapse. Don't talk to me about Clockwork right now. Talk to me in a couple of years when I can get this all behind my back, or talk to me in Q2, or talk to me in Q4, or whatever. How do you kind of respond to people that are so caught up in, saying things like, we're a client service business. We have to respond to emails at 7 a.m. and I have so many of these emails that I haven't gotten through. What are your kind of response to that hesitation?
Yeah, so they're experiencing what I call the superhero syndrome. It is deadly to small business. And here's the analogy. Think of your favorite superhero. We'll say Superman or Wonder Woman or whatever. And what they do is swoop in and save the day. So movie, Lex Luthor's destroying mankind or threatening to. So Superman swoops in, destroys Lex Luthor, and saves the day. But here's the downside of that. In the process, mankind becomes more dependent on Superman. Superman, please save us. Wonder Woman, please, we need you. We can't live without you. The second thing is the wake of destruction that they leave behind them. Like, I can't wait until someone releases the movie called The 50 Years After Superman Destroyed New York City and we had to rebuild it. Right. Like, that will never come out as a movie. But that's the reality. So mankind actually gets weaker in defending themselves, and there's destruction that need to clean up. The superhero syndrome is we as entrepreneurs feel that we need to swoop in and save the day, save that client that's threatening to leave, save that employee who's not happy, to fix that one problem that no one else has an understanding how to do it. We feel we have these superhero powers, but the reality is we're disabling our company from strengthening. They're actually weakening as a result. We're building a bigger and bigger dependency, and we can't see it. The wake of destruction we leave is maddening. We go in, we fix one thing, we leave this wake of mess behind us that the employees have to clean up in our absence. So we need to change the label. No longer consider ourselves superheroes, consider ourselves supervisionaries. This is where we have clear outcome of what we want. This is where we're championing our colleagues to get there, that we're actually clear about what their dreams and personal visions are and putting it in alignment with the corporate vision. This is where we're thinking strategically about, what's on the horizon of opportunity. What are the clients that are best for us, and how do we go about cloning these clients? What's the distraction? Who's the competitor that's really putting us at risk? We consider all those things and we move toward the vision. That's what prevents us, thinking that we're a superhero. My call out to everyone listening is no longer see yourself that way. Be a supervisionary. Make your colleagues the superheroes.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I also like the idea of making it kind of a throttle, because that way you don't get all of that resistance when you try to present this idea. I have started doing something that my fiance and I refer to as Freedom Friday, where we don't do any calls on Friday. And about half the day is spent on designing the business. Half the day is doing things like getting caught up and doing. So, and that would be about 10% of the workday then if it's half of one of the days. So long story short, that may sound like a suicide mission for people that are listening to say, I'm not going to do any calls on Friday. And so, I've kind of pushed that agenda to some of my friends that are entrepreneurs. And it's interesting because there is a point where it does make sense to them. Even if they're like, no, I have zero time. I'm already working 60 hours a week. I don't have an additional 10 hours a week to just quietly ponder the nature of my business. Even if you're working 7 to 7, let's say you work 7 a.m. to 9 without answering emails or phone calls. Just that 2 hours will start to get you in the habit of putting that time towards it. And then you're starting to engage that throttle. And I think that a lot of people listening to this will have a lot of success just making that first step, just to do an hour and a half, 2 hours focusing on designing. What do you think about that?
I love it. Listen, there's a statue dedicated to the most important thing we can do. It's a world famous statue. It's called The Thinker by Michelangelo. Here's some guy, with his chin sitting on his fist, just contemplating life. I will tell you one thing that Michelangelo did not make. There was no statue called The Doer, right? We want to focus on contemplation. And, it's so funny. I talk with entrepreneurs all the time, and I've experienced this myself. It's the shower moments where the great epiphanies seem to happen. That quick 10 minutes of hot water and all, like, oh my gosh, I never thought about this. Because you've allowed your mind the freedom not to focus on a task at hand. When we have the freedom just to think, we can address the impactful. When we don't give ourselves time to think, we focus on the apparent. And, there's always apparent things that need to be done. I need to answer the email. I need to do this and that. There's always apparent things, but rarely is the apparent things the impactful thing. And just by giving ourselves that breather time, we can consider what moves that are maybe small in the immediate scope will have a long-lasting, maybe extraordinary impact in the long scope. And those things will never present itself if you're always doing the urgent.
Yeah, you're really speaking my language. I was literally just thinking about the fact that most of the major moves that I've made in my career have resulted literally quietly thinking, staring off into space, coming to something. I mean, just to tie it into real estate, we have a pretty significant due diligence process that is, hundreds of hours, really, really common for us to spend that before moving forward with the deal. But it's not going through those line items where that decision is made. That decision is made quietly contemplating the implications of the deals, especially when we're talking about 7 and 10 year investment periods. It's not that we have just gone through the checklist and said, yep. It's that we quietly think, what does this feel right? And that's really what it's all about, especially in the world of passive investments where you're relying on someone else's expertise. So just wanted to mention that because it's especially true, at least in my business. I want to talk to you about something called the Queen Bee role. This is something you wrote about. I really love that. I love the name of it. Tell us what that is and why it's critical for entrepreneurs to identify what that is and then focus on it.
Yeah, so I was, as I was writing the book, I was studying all different types of businesses, trying to find a common thread for efficiency. What was the common thing they did? And it was interesting, as I was looking at these businesses, they all had their own efficiency mechanisms. I couldn't see something that translated across all businesses. So I dug deeper. And I decided to avoid or not look at businesses, but just look at organizations in general. Well, I found one that's non-human based, that's very efficient. Beehives. They're an extremely efficient organization. And what I mean by this is they can scale their beehives with very little energy use. And how they do it is by simplifying the rule set that they follow. In fact, there's only 2 really main rules if you're a bee. The first rule is always make sure that the QBR, it stands for Queen Bee role, is, I was going to say humming along, no pun intended, but it's humming along. And here's what I mean by this. The primary function of a beehive that's thrivability and survivability depends on is the production of eggs. Bees die all the time, so very quickly. So they know that if there's not eggs being produced, the colony is going to collapse. Now, the reason it's called the Queen Bee role, it happens that the Queen Bee is the one who's producing eggs. But I don't want anyone to confuse the queen bee being the most significant bee. She serves a role, a function like every other bee. If she's failing to produce, they will spawn a new bee and she's out, a new queen bee. So all the bees focus on is, are we producing eggs? Because if we are, we're safe. The second rule is if they're producing eggs, Then they can go and do their primary job function, collecting nectar or heating or cooling the hive. They do these different activities. Well, in every business, there is a core function in the business that the business's survivability and thrivability depends on. Most of us don't know it. Well, this core function, I call it the QBR, is within every organization, and we need to define it. And every one of the organization needs to know if that thing's not moving along, we're in trouble. We need to fix it. Now, subsequent to the release of the book, I found a very quick or shortcut to find it that I didn't reveal in the book that I'll share now, because I think this is the way that anyone can get it quickly. I'll do it by example. What we do is look at FedEx, because everyone knows that brand, and we got to consider what's their biggest promise. I call it the big promise, or commitment or guarantee. Every company has it. And I know we promise many things to our customers, but there's usually one thing that's our biggest promise. And there only can be one by definition. And for FedEx, the big promise is delivering packages on time. You know, they could have great customer service. They could have an amazing website, but it's delivering packages on time. That's their number one promise. We peel back the onion one layer and say, what's the doing activity? So the QBR is always a doing activity. What's the doing activity that makes that promise a reality? What's the number one thing? And again, there's many things influencing it, but what's the number one most important thing? And it's logistics. So FedEx knows that logistics now is the QBR. That means it must be protected. It must be humming along at all times. And every year, FedEx has trouble with the QBR. It happens around the winter holidays. There's more packages shipping at that time than anything else. Now, FedEx could say, you know what, let's let things slack right now. But that would devastate their business. It would put them under. They said, you know what, we're not going to deliver packages. Instead, they redirect their team. They pull managers out from behind the desks. They hire extra staff to move packages around their warehouses and distribution points. And they make sure it keeps humming along. So for everyone listening, we need to nail down what our QBR is. If there's a chain between me and you, Hunter, and we're pulling on the chain as hard as we could, the chain will break, but it always breaks in the same spot. That's the QBR. And if we simply strengthen that link and make it as strong as possible, the entirety of the chain now strengthens because we address the weakest link. In the QBR, we have to identify what's our big promise for our organization. What's the biggest commitment we're making to our customers? Always has to be just one commitment. I know we're doing multiple things for our customers, but what's the one biggest promise we're making? Then peel back the onion one layer and say, what's the one activity behind it that most makes sure that promise is delivered? That one singular most important activity, that's the link, that's the QBR, and it always needs to be humming along.
Yeah, I like it a lot. And especially going back to the 80-20 principle there, that's what's actually going to generate your business. That's what's actually going to allow you to take your business to the next level. It's not those other things. Those other things may be consequential. And in fact, the strategy that you have in the book where you're trying to identify the QBR, it's very challenging to just make it one thing. When you start, if you write 10 things down that you do for your business, then you probably think all of them are necessary. If you try to take one away, and one away, once you get down to 4 or 3 left, it becomes very challenging to eliminate those. Right? But once you do it, even if it takes a couple days to kind of meditate on and finally identify that one thing, once you do identify that one thing, it is like your entire worldview about your business can be codified, clarified, so you can actually go about that, focusing on that one particular thing. It's like an algorithm by say, is this the goal that I'm trying to achieve? Is this going to help me achieve that goal? And that's the easiest way that I've found to do that. So yeah, I definitely appreciate going to that level of detail, especially the stuff that's not included in the book.
Well, it's my pleasure. And, you know, I did this, as we were sharing earlier, I did this for myself. And as an author, I'm like, well, there's a lot of things I do, writing books, of course, and speaking and what we're doing now, interviews and discussions. And I'm like, they're all important. But I, too, have a singular QBR. And what I discovered is writing books. And here's what it means, is that if I decide to stop writing books, game over for me. Now I have to live off of the books I've produced, and that's it. And there's a fading trend there. So I got to write great books. That also means everything else plays secondary to it. So a discussion like we're having or a speech on the main stage, if it puts me in a position of compromising my ability to write good books, that's the thing that needs to be sacrificed. Now, I think what people misunderstand is saying once I identify the QBR, that nothing else should get done. Like I should never do an interview or never do a speech. And that's not the case. It simply puts a prioritization of what's the zenith activity, writing books for me, that can never be compromised. And everything else has to play second fiddle to it. With that clarity, it brings about a judicial use of time. I just don't overwhelm myself with speaking so that I can't write books. I don't overwhelm myself with interviews where I can't write books anymore. And that's how we all need to be. The primary function must always be humming along, and the other things then have to play second fiddle to it, but do not ditch them. You still maintain those. You have to be in the ballpark with those.
I want to take a second to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, which is the concept of the 4-week vacation. I'm sure that a lot of listeners are eagerly awaiting how they can accomplish this. So let's talk briefly about that and how to accomplish that.
Yeah, so the concept of the 4-week vacation, I discovered what the ultimate test is for a business that can run on its own. For almost every business, if the owner is not available to the business, a full physical disconnect and a full digital disconnect, if the owner's away for 4 consecutive weeks, that often the business will experience every element of that business during that time period. Most businesses are on month cycles. So attracting clients, delivering goods and promises, maybe an employee dispute or a client dispute or something. All that stuff happens on a monthly basis for most businesses. So the conclusion is if the entrepreneur business owner is not available, the business has to run on its own. So what we do is we declare a 4-week vacation, literally, and people listening could do this today, Hunter. You go on your calendar, and I'm not saying for tomorrow morning because we have to prepare for this, but a year out, maybe 2 years out, you put in your 4-week vacation. And what happens is we block this out. What happens is first there's a mind shift. There's the, oh crap, what I do moment. I can't do this. But then your mind says, well, I have to do it because now I'm committed to it. How do I start pulling it out? And you start treating your business differently. Instead of trying to be the solution provider, you try to be the empowerer. Instead of doing work, you're now designing how to get those results consistently and repeatedly. And you build your way to it. Now, the interesting way to build toward it is you actually take more vacations. So as I approached my own 4-week vacation, I first took a 1-week vacation. I sat down with my team before I left and said, the goal here is not necessarily for me to enjoy myself. I hope I do. But the goal here is to empower the team. I need you all to step up. I need us to create better systems. I need to be able to run in my absence. Then I came back, and any problems we had in my absence are the identification of what I need to fix, the dependencies on me. And so we'd fix those, and then I went on a 2-week vacation. Same thing. Any problems meant there was still a dependency on me. I had to fix it. Ultimately, 3-week and then 4-week vacation. And I came back, and sure enough, we still had some problems, but it was minor, not a single client issue, nothing. I found that certain employees stepped up. I only have 14 people that work along with me here. A couple of the people stepped up. So it's very clear who desires to play in a leadership role here and who just enjoys the work that they currently have. So that they kind of bifurcated themselves. I also found out there's one major issue we still have for us was branding consistency. I didn't even realize the influence I had over that and that I hadn't really allocated that out. So that's my next project I'm working on right now is building a brand transition to my colleagues so that they can contain and maintain the brand going on. That's the goal of the 4-week vacation, is to show that a business can run independently. And when it can, now you've hit it, because now you can, if you want, take off forever, but really you've proven your business can run on its own, allowing you to insert yourself back into the business in the way you want, if you want, and allowing you to increase the valuation of your business also.
100%. It's definitely going to help with that exit, but more than anything, then you are very much a rich entrepreneur because you realize that you can spend your time doing whatever you want, including working.
Yeah.
And there may be things in the business that you absolutely love doing that it doesn't matter how many zeros are in your bank account. You would want to do those things all day. Well, guess what? Now you can. That's the way to do that, is to identify that, then build a team that allows you to facilitate that. And then you can come as you go, come as you want. But part of that, of course, go ahead.
And you've created an ATM to some degree, right? I mean, isn't that the goal is financial freedom, that now the business can generate income, passive income. You don't need to actively participate. And what I loved too, Hunter, was the way my colleagues stepped up. At first I was scared. Like, if I leave, what they're going to say is I'm making money off of their own sweat, that I'm taking advantage of them. That was my fear. And then I realized, no, they see this as an empowerment opportunity, because if they can run the business without me, they can step into bigger roles. They can achieve bigger outcomes for themselves. There was one person that was like, oh my God, all you do is I work my butt off and you're taking money from me. And I realized that person just isn't a fit for our organization. If that's their mentality, that this is taking advantage of someone, they're probably not fit for this culture. Everyone else is like, wow, we're growing and stepping up into it. I'm like, this is the culture I want. So it also kind of helped separate out the people that want it versus the people that kind of want to leech off of it.
That brings up a really good point, which is kind of this building a team component, which is critical if you're going to have your business run like clockwork. There's something that is frequently kind of debated, which is the combination of whether you should hire for skills or whether you should hire for culture, or a weird combination of both. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I lean heavily toward hire for the intangibles, train the tangibles. So here's what's intangible. I cannot give people their attitude. I cannot give people their intelligence. I can't give them their energy. I can't give them their cultural fit. I can't give them any of those things. I can't give them their purpose or their concerns. What I can give them is a skill set. So what I found is for my businesses, consistently, it's been better to hire people with the attitude, energy, and so forth. Bring them on. These are people that are thirsty for it. They're intelligent. They can pick it up. And the nice thing is I don't need to unwind old skills that may have been great at another company, but are not a match for us. So it's kind of these skilled neophytes, but with the attitude and energy and intelligence that are just so driving, they've had the greatest success with.
So this is not something that's easy to do. Despite the fact that this interview has been very educational, building a business and building these systems is very challenging. Yeah. So I know that you do coach a lot of entrepreneurs through this process. What are some of the main hurdles that you see that really get the sticking points that if they could eliminate that preliminarily before really building a business, that it would go much more smoothly?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that superhero complex we talked about, that we see ourselves as a super doer and not a visionary. So we have to change the title. The first thing is I would no longer call myself an entrepreneur or business owner because sinfully people equate that term to doing work. I would call myself a shareholder. I would literally change my title because when someone asks you at a dinner party, what do you do? And you say, I'm an entrepreneur, your self-definition is that I work my ass off. But if you say you're a shareholder in a business, they'll just look at you weird. And now you got to explain what that is. And you're going to start redefining. That means I have equity in a company that I'm designing to run itself. So I would change that. The second thing is I would get very clear that time spent, regardless of how it's spent, is time spent, meaning all time spent is spent equally. So therefore, we need to default to higher value activity. And when you do this analysis, you'll find for many business owners, shareholders, I found that they are doing very low level activity and think that's saving the business money when it's costing them. A quick analysis, I write about this in Clockwork, is to figure out your hourly value. And what you can do is say, my intention, my value, if I was able to bring my skill set to another company, I get paid, I don't know, $100,000 a year, or whatever the number is. Divide that by 2,000. There's 2,000 standard work hours in a year. So it's $50 an hour. So you're getting, the company is designed to pay you $50 an hour, but you're stuffing envelopes and sending out emails. Would you hire someone and pay them $50 an hour to do that? Hell no. So then why have you hired yourself to do that? So you have to see, some of the $50 an hour, you better be doing high-end sales calls. You better be doing maybe some of the high-end customer service stuff for now as you elevate yourself through and start assigning out these, I don't know if the word's lower level tasks, but these lower cost tasks to other people quickly. The last thing is you got to convince yourself. And the danger I have when I tell people about the 4-week vacation is they say, that's absurd. I can never do it. And therefore I won't do it. And it's a shame because there's countries, most of Europe does a 4-week vacation and, BMW hasn't gone out of business. So it works. It's usually the Americans, us guys here that are struggling with this notion and therefore throw it out the window because it's too extreme of a step. I would suggest, actually, Hunter, you nailed it, dedicating just a small portion of the day. Maybe it's 2 hours, maybe it's 30 minutes. Start off with something that's so low that there's no excuse not to do it. And it's just thought time. Thought time is you don't go to the computer, you don't have your cell phone, you're not in the office, you're not at home. And if your office is at your house, it's somewhere, maybe you step outside for a second or go to a room you don't normally go to. And just sit there and ask yourself, what's the biggest challenge I have right now in my business, and what's an out-of-the-box solution I can do to resolve that? And just keep asking those questions over and over again. Let your thoughts flow. That's where the greatest discovery is going to happen. If you give yourself that design time, and over time, that will turn into a 4-week vacation and a business that runs on automatic.
Where was your last 4-week vacation to?
It ended up being a staycation. It was only, I got back 2 months ago. My wife, the day before we left, had a severe injury to her foot.
Oh, no.
So she was in a cast. So what I did was we did a staycation, which ended up being a blessing. We live near a lot of woods. So I blazed this trail through the woods that is an amazing hiking, biking, and ATV trail now. So it ended up being a lot of fun, chopping a lot of wood.
Well, that's actually a great case study for why this concept is so important. Like if you have some sort of emergency, particularly a medical emergency, if you have a business that's in place that can run itself, you can take care of yourself or your loved ones. That's a perfect example of that. So before we jump off, I definitely want to give the opportunity. Are you currently working on anything else? I mean, I have burned through all these books. I'm ready for more. What's next on the oven?
Oh, awesome. Well, my next book, I'm committed to this next book being the best book of my life. I think it's the most important concept. Right now, the working title is The Ascension Point. And what I've realized is there is a certain progression that I argue every business goes through. And that if you skip certain steps in this progression, it actually prohibits our growth. It's a cause of frustration. So many of us feel like we're spinning our wheels. We're not moving along, even though we're doing so much. Why is that? Well, the thesis is that the biggest problem we have as entrepreneurs is we don't know what the biggest problem is. That's our biggest problem. This pinpoints the problem and then gives the solution to bust through that. And right now I'm in the alpha stage of doing the research, testing. I just developed it over the last 3 years, but now we're actually testing with company after company, documenting what's happening, making minor tweaks to the system. And in 2020, the book will come out with the entire system.
Okay, we'll definitely have to have you back on at that time as well. Now, before we jump off, Mike, go ahead and let us know, how can listeners learn more about your company, find about the book you write, et cetera?
Sure. Thank you. Everyone's interested in learning more. My website's MikeMichalowicz.com, but here's the shortcut because that's a doozy to spell. It's MikeMotorbike.com, my nickname in high school. So go to MikeMotorbike.com. And on my website, all the books we talked about, free chapter downloads are all available, so you can learn about the books without needing to purchase anything. I used to write for the Wall Street Journal, so those articles are up there. And I'm also a podcaster and blogger, and all that stuff's available for free.
Awesome. Mike, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Hunter, thank you so much.
All right, listeners, thanks for checking out the episode. As always, the contact information for our guest will be available in the show notes page, which is hosted on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher. Don't forget, if you want access to some of the free goodies that I'm talking about at the beginning of these episodes, like free ebooks, weekly investor emails, and articles about some of the most important investment-related topics, make sure that you have created an account with CFC because this stuff is automatically available. You can do this by going to cashflowconnections.com and signing up as an accredited investor. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at hunterthompson@cashflowconnections.com. Thanks again.